I'm thinking that we should probably go ahead and get started if that's good with you guys. Anybody else joined us? I've got Mary Davis and Mary Linehouse and me and Brian.
This is Doug Farquhar, NCSL.
Oh, hi, Doug. Welcome.
Thank you.
Who else is with us? Well, let's start with our group here. If somebody else has a chance to join us, that'd be great. As I was saying a minute ago, Anna is actually at the Director of Public Health Preparedness meeting at the moment and is presenting to that group today about the index and getting feedback and sharing kind of status with that group. So she's not with us today, but we thought it was important to go ahead and continue our dialogues and discussions and to move forward, and then we'll have her join us again next time. She may step in at the end of the call if she gets a chance to step away from the meetings and join us for a moment. So we're mostly going to just use the agenda and talk through things today. I didn't do lots of slides or presentations because I really felt like the gist of what we were talking about and working on today really has more to do with dialogue. And so I didn't want to distract us with the other. Sometimes they can be distracting. So the first part of our agenda is just some basic updates, little short ones, and I'm going to actually juggle them around a little bit, and because they will feed into some of our discussion topics as well, but we can kind of adapt it accordingly. So in terms of updates, the kind of engage, there have been several opportunities for people to provide input, as you know, recently. So the public comment period ended at the end of September, and I'm hoping everyone got a chance to send in comments back to UK. And then they recently have posted the summary of the relevant findings. Actually, posted the actual summary of most of the comments themselves on the website. Have folks found that yet? Been over to that? Did you receive a notice about that being up there?
Yeah.
Yeah. They're very interesting to read through, and I think from the stakeholder engagement angle of things, if you all have a chance to do that, if you've not already done that, it's helpful to take a look at, and I think you will hear both some support for several of the proposals that were there, and everything from the benefit that it will be for being able to do trending, year-to-year comparison kind of things moving forward, being one of the hopes of this year. Some support for streamlining and paring down the index a little bit so that you can do things like confidence intervals, et cetera. But there were also several concerns expressed too, both about some of the proposed changes and interestingly, and I think very relevant for our group and much of what we'll be talking about later today on this call, is some concerns around the depth of stakeholder engagement and concerns that there were major changes without the ability or having not yet had the opportunity to really understand the impact on use and usefulness or fully kind of wrestle with the trade-offs that could be involved in some of the changes. And so I think that that message has come through hopefully fairly clearly, and I think is an opportunity. Much of that is an issue of transition years. It's been a challenge to shift over processes and develop new work groups and do all that in time to produce the index. But I think it gives us opportunity to really think through that moving forward. And I think this work group can be a real core component. So those were kind of a couple of the key themes that we heard through the public comment period. What did you all hear or see or anything else that you've picked up on in terms of the feedback or the dialogue in your own groups or work groups that we should kind of bring forward or highlight? Everybody's quiet today. If you haven't had a chance to read through it, it's worth doing, so you may want to do that. And they are posted, so they're on the website, the comment period. Um, the second activity that is up and running, just finished last night actually, was the Delphi process. As you know, one of the efforts moving forward was to do some weighting, more explicit weighting of the index measures as they roll up into subdomains and domains. And so the Delphi process, the first round of that finished up last night. I think I was very end, getting my last few ones in with that. They've had fairly good response, and it's healthy. With each of the domains, they've had between 18 and 33 respondents per domain, and so they feel like they may have some good data there to really begin to think about weighting. And depending on how much there's concurrence in that data and how much there's divergence, will, I think, shape both the round 2 of the Delphi process and the ways that that data, that information gets translated into the index. And also, I think, in terms of the timing, whether or not there'll be ability to implement that this year, or if that will be a next year. The Delphi process is underway there. And then the third one is very relevant for our group here, and that's the use, usability, and usefulness survey. And has anybody had a chance to do that one yet?
This is Mary Limehouse. I took the survey on Friday.
Great. Thank you. Doug, have you had a chance to yet, or Mary?
Well, I took a look at it, and I fill out some, make a comment about it. It's very comprehensive to take a look at. So, if we're thinking about the same survey, that is.
Yeah. How long did it take you all to go through it?
20 minutes to a half hour.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Did that seem pretty reasonable as we think about launching it more broadly later?
Yeah, that's about what you should expect.
So, you feel like folks in your constituency, in your groups, would be okay with that kind of a survey time?
Yeah, that's about the maximum I think they would go for.
Yeah, you bet. Well, thank you for doing that. If you run into others who are on the work groups or would have received that, please do encourage them to complete that one. I think Anna's, because there's been so many things going out for comment and work and response, I think they are going to be extending that until November 14th is what I hear, to get that feedback back. And that's pretty important feedback because that really is meant to shape much of the communications and the website activities for this next launch, because there won't be time to have had the full, broader population-based survey before this next launch. And so that's going to be pretty important feedback to get. We can use the feedback of the work groups and the involved parties to help shape some of that. So folks that haven't done that yet, please encourage them to do so by the 4th. The last area has to do with, in terms of updates, has to do with the meeting of the advisory committee on Friday. And I asked Anna, I wasn't there, so I don't know of all the findings of that. But I did ask Anna to share some kind of basic bullets of some of the salient bullets or key points from that advisory committee meeting. The way the project is structured, the decision-making body for the index is well, actually, it's officially Robert Wood Johnson, but they do that through the National Advisory Committee. And so that was the group that met on Friday and reviewed the feedback from the public comment period, as well as feedback that they've received in dialogues and discussions with stakeholders over the last 2 or 3 weeks. Astrid did a lot of good work mobilizing and talking, having Glenn and Anna and others speak with state health officers and preparedness directors as part of where Anna is today. to kind of continue to have more dialogue around some of the proposed changes as opposed to simply providing the document and saying send us back comments. And so they took that information and I hear had a very robust discussion and good and constructive meeting on Friday. If I kind of go down the quick list of some of the things that they reference, I won't spend a lot of time because I think there'll be a summary of the meeting coming out subsequently, I suspect. And I know many of the things are still in development. That one of the outcomes of the meeting is the fact that the advisory committee is going to continue to meet by conference call every 2 weeks from now until probably production time, to really continue to work on several of the issues that are being fleshed out and applied this year. So roughly speaking, the things that came forward were that scaling was the new method of scaling the measures was adopted for the next version of the index. They actually ended up going through pretty much measure by measure many of the other recommendations and discussing them as an advisory committee, and probably got through about 90% of them. There's still another 10 or 15% that they are going to be discussing in coming weeks more. And so I think they looked more closely at some of the nuances of how to which ones really should be adopted or excluded or modified or shifted, and refined some of that approach compared to what it was in the original public comment document. So there's still work there to do. So it's not clear yet what the final number of measures will be, and that also will have some impact on whether or not confidence intervals can be calculated, because if there are too many measures, then they are not able to do confidence intervals. Interestingly, the confidence intervals are not necessarily confidence intervals around the exact, we know how close we are to the truth in health security surveillance, et cetera. It's really a kind of a cumulative or kind of a composite of the level of confidence of each of the individual measures added up there. And so if there's too many measures, the confidence intervals become too wide, and they can't do the confidence intervals meaningfully. So that's not yet clear if they'll be able to be done or not, depending on the number of measures that end up being held. Similarly, the extent to which the Delphi process results are kind of come back in terms of convergence and similarities, or if there's some width and diversities, may or may not mean that weighting is in the index this year or not. We just don't know yet that. And then there was some discussion too just about the timing of the index production, and we'll come back to that when we talk about the second part of our discussion. But as you know now, it's currently slated to come out in December, although there is some dialogue about the possibility of potentially pushing that back a couple of months, up to a couple of months, but that is not anything specific at this point. And so we're still on the timeline right now for December, but we'll come back to that in a moment. And then the last area that was discussed, and I think this will launch us into our next discussion here, really, and open that up, is the importance of communications. And they had a lot of dialogue that really will capture some of the nuances of how we communicate changes this year, as well as the importance of stakeholder engagement in the coming year, and how it needs to be earlier and more in-depth in the coming year. And so I think there's a pretty strong support for that occurring, and which actually leads us, I think, into the next discussions in terms of how to make that occur, build that. Any questions on the NAC meeting or Friday's meeting or the process moving forward? Well, let's shift over then to talking about stakeholder engagement in the index. this is becoming an issue of increasing relevance, and I really felt like this was a work group that could kind of think about that strategically some, and maybe just start that by thinking about our own work group. And so in talking to Anna about this in the last month or so, one of the thoughts we had was to do a little bit of kind of a self-assessment of where do folks feel that they are now and where they'd like to be. And so I sent out a couple of models of engagement. And I'm hoping folks here had a chance to look at those and to begin to think about them in the context of your own constituents, in your own, and we kind of think strategically, where are we now, where do we want to be, and then how do we then move ourselves in that direction. So I'm just going to open it up a little bit and see if anyone on the phone has thoughts of which model tended to resonate with you more, and where you feel like you and your constituency are at the moment. Need to be shy.
When did you send that out?
Brian, did it go out? I was thinking it was out Friday, but it may have been Monday. When did you send it out?
It actually should have gone out. Well, I actually sent it out on Monday. The documents can also be found in a files box if you're logged into Adobe Connect.
And it's entitled Stakeholder Engagement Assessments?
Yes, that's it.
All right, great. Thank you.
Can you pull it up for us, Brian? Is that on the screen?
I can try and do that. I'll have to upload it to Adobe Connect, but if you can give me some time, okay, I might be able to do that.
And if folks can, if you've got it on the email, or if you can pull it down off Adobe Connect, I think you can open it yourself. I can walk you through it. Did anybody else get a chance to look at it, or?
Yeah, this is John Osborne. Apologies for being late to the call.
No problem. Welcome.
Thank you. Having looked at it and used similar tools from a change management perspective in the past, I mean, I suppose if I think from the hospital or healthcare provider organizational perspective, to me, the question that I've been thinking about is how do we answer the question, what's in it for me? So how would I, to a hospital executive, explain and articulate what the value of the index is to them as a kind of from a resource perspective? How can they use it in discussions that they and others are having around policy decisions within their organization or with broader groups of policymakers? And so, as I looked at the models, to me, the stuff on the third page, I think, was the most useful. And then, kind of along that figure one spectrum of stakeholder engagement, I think that probably would be, from my perspective, the lens that I would look through it. It's not clear to me, for example, the number of stakeholders potentially to the index and to the project is so large that looking at things in terms of citizen control, delegated power, right? I mean, I don't think we're working necessarily in that space. It's not something that everyone is required to participate in. It isn't, at least to this point yet, kind of a major input or determinant of federal or state policy. So looking at it, I found on those things, I think may, wouldn't necessarily be potentially productive. Where we're looking at it from trying to decide for key stakeholders who they are and where from they need to be communicated with and informed up through, we need to make sure that they're at the table and supportive to avoid blocking further progress. That's where that sort of inform, communicate, engage diagram I thought would be useful as we're looking at, all right, who are the groups that are going to be able to enable success? Who are the groups that are going to be able to derail or get in the way of further development of this as a tool? And what do we need to do specifically to each of those major areas to be successful?
And John, when you think about the spectrum of engagement, there's all kinds of, because I think you're very right, we need to get down to the details of that list. But I'm kind of take that back because I also want to think about, what is that group's interest at this point in terms of where would they need to be in the decision-making responsibilities of the index? I mean, from the very bottom, if you look at whether it's the first page or the second page, do you think they are thinking about it at all or engaged at all now? Are they getting information about it, or is there an interest in actually consulting or in partnership, or is there an interest in, where do you think they are now? Where should they be?
Sure. I think if you look at kind of individuals, individual organizations, and kind of in the critical infrastructure parlance, individual owner operators, right? So my institution, for example, right, probably not on their radar beyond, folks whose day job it is to worry about these sorts of things. And so as kind of individual organizations, I don't know that there's necessarily a need beyond informing, right? This is what the index is. This is how it was devised. Here is how you can use it. I think if then you take it up to kind of aggregations, so hospital associations, trade associations that are now more actively involved in policy advocacy and that driving resource allocation, then I think it becomes a more interesting conversation in where you would want to have, the American Hospital Association or key state hospital associations aware of this is what the index is, this is what it means, here are ways to use it to further policy conversations in your jurisdiction. So that when it comes to, okay, great, you're a state that's low on the index, for example, or the healthcare operations delivery component of the index is weak in one area or another, how do you take that and leverage those findings to help, make improvements to use to kind of describe the problem and identify solutions with policymakers. So, I think within the healthcare delivery segment, our key targets are going to be, individuals informed, but the larger the trade association or hospital association, the more towards engaged in terms of actively participating and understanding enough to be able to take a position to say, we're aware of what the index is, and not only that, we know how it got there, and we endorse its findings as a useful tool to ensure continued preparedness and enable hospitals to be able to respond to the community's needs. Is that where what you're trying to get at?
Yeah, I am, but I'm also thinking, and I think you're right on target with each of those. I'm also thinking as the index evolves and continues to develop, and because it still is in that developmental stage, it's not a fixed product yet.
Sure.
And there are real trade-offs in looking at what measures to include and what to exclude and how it's going to get used. And so I guess the other piece, the third piece of that is and you're nicely breaking down different groups with different needs, and that's exactly what we need to do for planning purposes. But so where's the link that says, here's who we need to work with that can bring the expertise around that sector, and here's how they can best be engaged to actually help us look at those trade-offs in the design of the index.
Oh, sure.
Where does
and I think then, there's probably, again, two angles to play at it. Hospitals and healthcare organizations increasingly confronted now with, we are responsible for populations. We are responsible for the health of populations, whether or not that population knows that we're responsible for them necessarily. And so the concept of health security more broadly than in a kind of how it may have been more narrowly framed in the past around national health security and the sort of national security preparedness and response perspective. But health security takes on a different meaning when you look at populations that I am financially accountable for are at risk. Their risk is my responsibility. So I think there are probably a group of individuals who have a good understanding of what population health management means and what the determinants of health relative to consumption of healthcare are, that can help to inform elements and dimensions of the index around drivers to kind of health risk in the perspective of folks who are going to have outcomes that are worse than expected because, whatever, barriers to literacy, barriers to health literacy, barriers to access. And then similarly, I think there would be, again, getting to kind of association level aggregations of organizations who are looking at what the policy and the resource implications are going to be. So not only what are the kind of underlying drivers that should be included as elements of risk in determining what the risk index is, but also, okay, great, we've got these dimensions of health risk, and so how do you take and operationalize that or take that and put it into action? What's meaningful to hospital leadership and health provider organization leaders versus what's going to be overlooked or is going to diminish the message.
Communicate.
Right, because you're getting now into whether we like it or not, into political territory, right,
Sure.
where people's beliefs around is climate change. Well, first, is the climate changing, and should we care, and is climate change something that healthcare organizations should be concerned about, or is that going to turn people off because they see that as an end around a policy, kind of a particular current political niche that is trying to be forced, if you will, into other areas. So I think one of the things that we would want to be, sensitive to is how do we drive back to, yep, these are things that are important that are going to impact you operationally, and so therefore we're not getting involved into political debates about whether or not it should be healthcare's problem, and that there's not a perceived encroachment on things like literacy and education and these sorts of things into healthcare, because healthcare organizations are already feeling beleaguered with what they feel like is the responsibility that they carry with limited resources to actually accomplish it.
Sure, absolutely. So some folks Doug.
Well, I was just kind of thinking along these same lines about how I interpreted the survey for state legislators, and on the positive side, it gives them an assessment. It's kind of like, are we doing well or not? Where do we stand? And they can look at this. But how can they use it to modify their policy approach in the sense of, what can they do to save themselves money? How are these things funded? What are areas they can use to leverage activities to make certain things better? Because there's, an endless number of groups out there that are trying to say, we need X, Y, and Z, and they're all legitimate. It's like, what's going to be the value of investing in this, or to use this data to invest in one aspect of the database to build it up versus using that money for something else. And it really comes back to my thoughts on Medicaid. Because that's the number one budget driver for the states. And states are just really getting desperate on trying to figure out how can they make their federal matches to keep these programs going. And if you can, I'm just trying to figure out ways we can couch this in terms of ways to save money, make it so it's a very practical tool for them. Then I think we got some, then we'll get some more buy-in. They'll look at this, they'll focus on it versus just another, group saying that, well, you're not doing as well as you're supposed to. Well, yeah, that's kind of the modus operandi out there, So, how do you give yourself more weight, more credibility, something that's going to really factor into a policymaker's response on this area?
So, Doug, when you think about that, those are great mechanisms and tools to think about how do we engage people in the index in the end product. In terms of developing the index, that's the kind of input that is needed to kind of say, we need to take that to operationally. How is a use that looks at that? Is it ready for that use? And how do we communicate that? And what about the structure and the process and the visualization of it, the communication tools lets it be used that way? That's really helpful input. Is that best done through this kind of work group that as you feed that in? Are there other ways that we can better engage people in the development piece of it so we make sure it reaches that goal that you just described?
Well, it's going to be very tough to do because even though the survey, only took a half hour, it's not that. I think you've made it as user-friendly as possible. The problem is they've got immediate needs. They're going to want to see, okay, we need this kind of information. I've got 2 minutes to look at something, not a half hour. And trying to convey this in a manner that's going to be really simple and straightforward for them so they can say that, we need to invest in this to save ourselves some money. That's a heck of a bigger challenge out there.
Yeah.
And I wish I had an easy answer for you, but unfortunately I just do not.
No, I know it's challenging. And I guess I'm trying to step us back not just to the survey piece, but to how do, our role as our work group even in developing the index. How do we best partner, let's talk a little bit about the role of this work group here in terms of our ability, what do we think our responsibility should be in the index as we move it forward, and what roles would you all like to play finishing out this year and then moving into next?
Well, I'm thinking of once it gets completed, highlighting it through our web users, highlighting it at certain meetings, providing this as an answer for when we get information requests on preparedness. Where do we stand on preparedness? Well, we have this tool out there you can take a look at, and that's all well and good. But I'm really trying to figure out a way that we're going to be able to use this to say this is a real strong policy tool to really dictate, really help guide us towards some policy solutions out there, which are facing everybody right now. And one of the things that I think a lot of the states kind of regret is the fact that after 9/11, they've received all these fundings to upgrade certain systems, which they have, but they have no way to maintain those systems and continue them going. And so, now you get something like a tool like this to say, yeah, these things are kind of falling to the wayside. How do we incorporate that back in? How do we address funding for it that's not coming from the federal government? And that's a real challenge.
Does the index project leadership have a vision in mind of the current or eventual use for the index? Or is part of the development of the index looking at ways that it could be useful and therefore should be developed in certain ways to continue to build out its usefulness?
Yeah, well, I think certainly there is the uses that were envisioned at its beginning, and I think it still holds there, and they really have to do with, I'd say the one that we keep hearing most feedback on and most passion around is using it as a quality improvement tool. Now, it also had a goal and objective of using it to articulate progress made. We've done a lot of investing. We have done a lot of resource allocation towards preparedness. Are we making progress? Where have we made progress? Where do we have more progress to go? Which then, of course, links back to quality improvement. Then also in terms of helping people understand preparedness, health security preparedness. What does that mean? Who's involved, and how do you engage new partners in that? Because it's not just about the hospital or the public health department. It's across the whole of the community. So I think those are some of the uses that have been laid out in the mission statement of the index. But it comes down to, how we want to use it practically speaking. And so we're now at a stage of people are able to now begin to use it, and we're learning to see what strengthens that, what is best and what's not. That and as we evolve it and as we put it up on a website with a new look, it was a new look this year, and it's going to be it's going to be evolving to next. What what meets a need that is currently there best, and how do we best build on that? So, I mean, there are laid out objectives and uses for the index, but interestingly, you know, people come in with new ideas of how it could be useful, or realize that, you know, this maybe it's not ready yet for funding allocation decisions. You know, it's a little premature for that, perhaps. You know, so if that's not really the intent per se. It may inform those decisions, but not give you the answers for those decisions. If that makes sense.
Sure. Well, I think understanding where the leadership team is wanting to move it at the big picture helps to establish kind of where those boundaries are, right?
Yeah.
So you might not then ask people, how would you use it to make funding allocation decisions if it's not designed or intended to be a tool to do that, versus asking somebody, how would you like to use the preparedness index? I suspect they're going to come back and say, I need some help figuring out where to make investments.
Right.
So I think part of our job as a work group is to take back that feedback to the other work groups and the advisory committee and say, look, we're hearing from the folks that we're engaging with in discussions around how best to utilize this, that if it doesn't, for example, if it doesn't provide, insights or suggest, kind of a guide to figure out, okay, if we only have X number of $1 million to invest, we're going to invest it here versus there because that's where we'll get the greatest return, improvement, the greatest increase in improvement on our index score, for example. Then so I think some of it is our job is to take, okay, great, what's the leadership for the project want to do with it, and translate that into messages to our relative stakeholder constituents, but also to have them come back and say, well, that's great, but here's what I really need help doing, and translate that back then up to the project leadership to say, right, we're on track, we're 80% on track, or we're really pulling in a direction differently than where most groups who would potentially use this would use it, and so we might want to reconsider our strategy.
Right.
And that's an important dialogue to have, is like, where do we want to invest our funds and how do we define that? But I think we have to be kind of cautious about going down that path, but I do think it's something that needs to be explored.
Well, it's interesting because we've got a couple case studies actually evolving where places have started to go down that path, potentially prematurely. There's one state where the state legislature decided to use the index as their performance improvement tool for public health, or at least for the preparedness arena of it, or the emergency preparedness aspect of things. And while it's nice to have that visibility, and one has to be very careful how one uses it in that setting, because it's not about the numbers as much as can you use it in terms of looking at where our strengths are and where our challenges are. As opposed to the answer is all in the number of 7.3, and that compares to the state, to the nation, and is below or high, and therefore you're not doing well as an agency, because it's really not about an individual agency. That actually, I think, has been a key message that we've been starting to hear from other groups in terms of when we did the communication material this year, and we've said this before, but to even highlight even further that the index is about the whole of community working together on these things. It's not about the effectiveness of simply a standalone effectiveness of a health department or a hospital or a state legislature or anything else.
Will you or anybody else from the Index Project have a presence at the National Healthcare Coalition meeting in December?
I don't, Brian, do you know if Anna's put any links into that, or? I know we've talked about that one in the past.
No, I haven't heard anything about it yet.
I can certainly ask her about that.
I mean, that would be, I think, given the, full of community use tool to help identify strengths, weaknesses, and decide collectively where improvement needs to be made, that's going to be a group and a structure that exists now in most regions, where I suspect a lot of this work would be done.
Yep.
And they, as a group of participants, may be a good group to assess. Okay, let's sit down with a few of the coalitions that are on the more mature side of the spectrum, and a few that are in the emerging, developing side of the spectrum, and have a dialogue around. All right, how would you use this? And would this help you as a coalition or as a group of coalitions within a geography identify where there's room to work, or that you even got the right people around the table? Because I suspect that would be where a lot of this work, if it's a driver to quality improvement, is going to be done. And so if there's not an opportunity to participate there, I think it should be a priority for the project at some point in the near future to engage with coalition leaders from various areas to see how well does our model resonate with the operational model that's emerged.
It would be a good follow-up, because I think they were there last year. Dan Hanfling and others, Chad Priest and folks, I think, were there last year with that meeting.
Sure.
It would be a good follow-up with them with that. So let's scroll down. Brian, can you scroll down to the third page of the document that's on the thing? And this kind of gets back to, John, when you were talking earlier. I'm wondering if it's, these were sort of, and I think kind of strategically planning forward as we engage other folks. This was sort of a model that one entity looked at in terms of mapping your stakeholders. Does that make sense to you all? And would it be something that you could take the three, look at, and from your angle of things, who are the groups and who are the right folks that need to be linked to, and how that might map out? Because is that something you could fill out for yours if we were to take it and then compile it back and kind of begin to look at it strategically in terms of a stakeholder engagement and communications plan? Cool.
Sure.
That's something you could each do?
Well, I'm trying to figure out how I would do it, and engaging this in a manner that's going to be valuable to you. It's a very eclectic group when you deal with state policymakers about what they're interested in and how they would respond to something like this.
Right.
So I'm just
And
trying
maybe
to
looking at it not necessarily as one line, but I think it would be interesting to compare your perspective, understanding how state policymakers think and work, across whom you would identify as, all right, here are the key people that a state legislator is going to expect to have seen engaged, and who they're going to look for to provide guidance and influence. And similarly, from my perspective, from the delivery side, okay, who am I going to take cues from, right? If this group is on board, then our organization is more likely to take it seriously, versus if that group says it's not really worth it, then we're more likely to be disinterested. And it may be useful to, across the perspectives offered by work group members, to have everybody list who they think the key stakeholders are, whether it's a peer of theirs or a totally different outside group. There may be some useful insights around if everybody's list includes state health department directors as being both highly, having detailed expertise and having a high degree of criticality of being involved, then that may help us identify some targets.
What do folks think about then? So that proposal is then to kind of have everybody do a broad list, but then maybe flesh out the details of the few that you know well. We can see where the overlaps are, or if you want to just do the ones you know well, I can compile them and we can have some discussion and dialogue around them.
Sure.
Yeah, that might be a thought.
Might be shorter that way, because I think we have a fairly good, list of, we know the general categories of entities that are important, but we haven't really fleshed it out in terms of, what's the depth of their interest, and what is the expertise that they've got to bring, and how willing are they to engage? Because you have a better sense of how willing they be to engage at this point, or the criticality of involvement in terms of, can they really promote it and advance it widely, or derail it? Probably have a better sense of some of those groups than I would or others will. We each have our own area that we know what they are.
Sure.
So I think this was in a Word document. I think I had it as a Word document. No, it's
Have it in a
PDF.
PDF here.
Okay, I will send it out in Word. And if people kind of think through what that might look like from some key groups from your angle.
Okay.
And think about it in terms of that spectrum. Again, as you scroll down, go a little further down, Brian. The way this model works is they actually kind of do some, you actually put low, medium, and high under each of these areas, and then begin to kind of map your different groups, and then therefore your strategies change. So, if there are folks that don't have a lot of willingness or a lot of expertise to contribute to it, and not that interested, you're just going to be informing that group. And maybe that's the individual, facilities that you're talking about at the moment, John. But then there's folks that are going to be high on the willingness and high on the expertise. Those are the folks you need to actually engage in partnership and development piece, and that can really provide that. It's you all in the work group members that we can actually say, okay, we've got this challenge, and we're wrestling with A versus B, and we need your input as to how we make it get to X. That's the engagement piece. But then there's folks that are in the middle there that may have a low willingness but high expertise, but you just don't have the option to really fully engage them at this point. And so therefore, in those situations, it's two-way dialogue and communication as probably as far as you're going to get. So I'm trying to think about who are the groups that we could put in those categories, and how do we best think about then informing or communicating or engaging in terms of that spectrum of engagement. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
So I'll send it out in Word form, and if you all could think through the groups that you think would be beneficial, just maybe just be 3 or 4 from each of you or something. That's fine. Don't spend hours and hours on it. But if you could think through and then put kind of a low, medium, high assessment on and any comments in each of those boxes, that'd be great. Mary, you've been pretty quiet. Any thoughts you all have? Both Marys.
Oh, when do you need this back by? I'm sorry.
What's good for you all? You want to just do it in the next week or so, or?
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think. I'll be at APHA next week, and I just trying to figure out my schedule.
Sure. It's one of those 20-minute things while you're on the airplane. Along with the 20 million other things you have on the airplane, I know. I mean, it could be. We can do 2 weeks too. It's not like if it's better. Sometimes you put too far out, it just never happens because we all put it off.
Yeah.
So I was trying to hit that balance. So you're all
2 weeks, fine. Just bug us in a week.
Okay. 2 weeks, the week reminder. Sounds good. All right. Good. Mary, either Linehouse or Davis, any thoughts you've had with all of this, or?
This is Mary Linehouse. Nothing in particular. I've been following the conversation, and I'm in general agreement with the things that have been mentioned, and I think it's a reasonable starting point to take a stab at filling out this table a little bit and see if we can flesh out something.
Okay. And Mary, thank you too. I know CDC spent a lot of good time giving feedback collectively on the public comment documents, and I think that was really helpful.
Good.
And so, if you can think through, ways that they can best engage as we move forward, as you all can best engage as we move forward in terms of early and often, so that we're not in surprises at the end of comment periods, et cetera. We're trying to think, how do we, in the development process, make sure that we really get real-world policy and practitioner feedback and dialogue around key changes that are being considered. So there's work that we can do from the development angle of things, and from how we share information and how we package it, and then there's also you all can help us shape how best to do that in a way that is meaningful. All right. Let me briefly shift us up to the communications and launch of the 2015-16 index. The current timeline is that this coming month, November, is really the development of communication materials and running the index models and finalizing the content, with the goal, if it stays to this timeline, of having December have a potentially 2-week period for state review, and then a soft launch somewhere mid-December. Soft launch would mean not lots of public visibility, et cetera, no press releases or presentations, but just sort of it would show up on the website. And then January would be more of a hard, big flash launch kind of thing. That is the current timeline that it is, and the contractual timeline and stuff. But I know they are looking at the possibility, given the amount of work that needs to be done and the nuances of communicating some of these changes being made, to seeing if there's any flexibility in that and working through some of that. So it's kind of, we'll know more hopefully in the next few weeks in terms of if there's any flexibility with that. But so clearly we're going to have a lot of work in the next month in terms of both finalizing the index and then also developing the communication materials around it. So I just want to open that discussion up around key documents and focuses for communication around launch, but also to talk about your all's role in that. I mean, are you all interested in dealing with the strategy level, or would you be willing to review some drafted materials and provide feedback on them as they come out, looking at it from your own constituency perspective? What kind of work would be best for you all in that next month or two as we move into production mode?
Well, from my end, reviewing documents is something that's easily done, between in an airplane, to and from places. So I think that would be something that I think would be fairly straightforward to do. And given the amount of tasks and the limited amount of time that's there, if there is a strategy in place, I think it would probably be more effective execute it. And I'm happy to help, edit and provide input to maximize, utility of things. But don't know that we need. I don't know. We've got a lot of time for extended discussions of strategy.
No, the strategy discussions I think are more like for next year. It's kind of thinking. It's really thinking. We're kind of in this mix between we've got to move to production mode right now, but we also want to be thinking about laying the groundwork for as we move into 2016.
Sure.
Yeah, in terms of strengthening that engagement, both in the engagement in stakeholders in development of the index and in use of the index. But I think you're right that this next month is really about more production and development of tools. So if you all are willing to review documents and provide edit and input, that'd be great.
Happy to.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say happy to do that.
That would be super. Well, I will share that with Anna. I know the kinds of, we did a survey of users last year looking at the index the year before, and they kind of gave us a priority in that time of some of which documents were most useful, and the ones they really brought up as being most useful were the frequently asked questions, the key messages, the briefing slides, and then also some of the standing things, which were like the definitions of the domain subdomains and the measure details. So I'm thinking that those would be the kind of key ones that we would update and change accordingly related to what's new in the index. If there's anything else that you all think would be most helpful to add to that list, let me know.
Sounds good. Thank you.
I think they actually are going to be using, I think UK is going to be using RWJ's media and public relations firm to help draft documents and things. And so it's probably going to be a fairly quick cycle of they draft something, it comes UK, and any of the rest of us are able and willing to do some review and edit and input. Then we'll just do a cycle and refinement with that. So your all's input with that would be great. So I appreciate that. That's wonderful. So I'm assuming I could just, we don't have to wait for work group calls, but we could just send those out, and those that have time to look at them and review them could send comments back, and we have a deadline on them. Does that sound like a fair way to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that'll work.
All
Yeah, that
right.
sounds good. It sounds like maybe you might have some short timelines, so if you maybe just can keep us updated a little bit about if you expect that you're going to be asking us for something and that it might just have only a couple days to comment on it, the more notice and what the process that we have, probably the better.
Good. Super. Great. All right. I'm recognizing we are coming up on time. Anything else that people want to bring up or suggest or think about moving forward? Well, in terms of wrap up and to-do list, I will then get you the document out on kind of thinking strategically moving forward in a Word document. And in a couple weeks, if you all could get that back just in terms of mapping out any of the groups you think most relevant, then I can compile and we can begin to think through that as we move forward, both in rolling out this year's in the next several months, but also really about moving into 2016, 2017, and beyond there. So I'll get that one out to you shortly. And I will pass on the info to Anna about the Healthcare Coalition Conference, make sure that's on her radar screen. And then the U3 survey's out there. If you folks haven't had a chance to do that, please do. And then the last piece is we'll keep you updated on development of tools and materials as the index gets finalized and models get run and that kind of thing, and do a rapid cycle turnaround of edits. And as much as I can give you a warning, I will let you know. Anything else I've forgotten on our list?
There's a lot of ground to cover. Well done.
We did. Well, thank you all for being here and doing it. I appreciate it. It sounds like it's going to be a busy couple months. Great. Well, I wish everybody a smooth, here's rainy day. I guess people were saying it was already, but a good fall here until we talk next in the next few weeks and months over this. So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, guys.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.